Hello, everyone. Thanks once again for joining the EA Global Summit 2020. This is Nizam. I'm from the Global Summit organizing team, and we have Ian with us. Ian is the founder of eaDocX and a Sparks partner and a Sparks expert, and he's gonna present on EA for Teams. This is following the great reception that we had for his presentation yesterday, which was also available for you, which will be available for you as a recording post the summit. And this in this session, Ian will be talking about the key issues and decisions that you need to consider when scaling up your modeling team, and will also show you how to avoid the common pitfalls. So before we jump to the session, I would like to make a quick note that any discussions and any questions regarding this session, please add them to the Teams channel. The Teams channel has seen a really good response so far, and we have all the EA practitioners available for you to answer. And Ian will also be available post the session to discuss and answer your queries. So that the link to the channel will be posted in the chat window, and please feel free to join and ask your questions in them. We'll have a few minutes of Q&A post the session, and we'll have a few questions answered by Ian while we are all connected. But for the rest of it, we'll have a detailed discussion in the Teams channel. So that's it, passing to Ian. Thanks once again, Ian, for joining the session, and over to you now.
Okay, right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Nizam. My name is Ian Mitchell. I'm talking to you from Abergavenny in the Welsh Mountains, again, where it's a very, very beautiful day. So please come back to Wales when we're open again. I'd like to actually, before we start, make one correction to Nizam's introduction. He was very kind to call me an EA expert. I can't be, because I learned a load from listening to Peter Lieber this morning in his session about integration. So I'm afraid I can't be an expert. The session this morning then, which by the way, I'm going to try and do a little bit quieter than I did the one, a bit slower rather than the one I did yesterday. I only had 1 cup of coffee this morning instead of 3, so that's probably going to help. The session this morning is about issues to do with growing your EA team. It's something that I get involved with a lot of different clients, where they've grown a little bit, they've done some great stuff in EA, and they want to run it out a bit more widely. So this is a session based on something that I do with clients in a one-day workshop, where we actually go through all of these issues in a lot of detail and work out what are their strategies going to be. So I've kind of condensed that down. There's a slide here about my bias as well. We could spend all day talking about all the things I'm biased about, but that's just a few of them. So my one-day workshop on growing your team is a bit like this. There's all kinds of things to think about. Some of them are quite nitty-gritty, some of them are quite small and detailed, like how we're going to use security and how we'll set up our groups and permissions and things like that. This session is going to be a smaller and a bit broader, and try to pull together some things that I think I've learned and I've heard other people talk about from making EA adopted more widely in your organization. So in this one, I'm not trying to make you an expert in anything. I'm just trying to make you aware that some of these things are out there. I have to say, I was changing these slides up until about 10 minutes ago, because I learned so much from listening to Peter and from Nizam and Ryan yesterday that I've changed a whole load of stuff. So the latest version will be on the website fairly soon. This is my kind of mental picture of people's use of EA. So these 3 phases. It's a very typical kind of technology adoption curve, which you'll have seen at Gartner and all kinds of stuff. There's a burst of enthusiasm at the beginning, and then total gloom, and then if you're lucky, it all kind of evens out and becomes a steady state thing. The kind of the Tigger phase, if you like, the super enthusiasm phase is, I mean, I've been a Tigger. Oh, and by the way, I think we're going to offer these model expert badges that hopefully you can see, for people who like to nominate themselves or their colleagues as being a Tigger, the super enthusiastic, knowledgeable EA genius in their organization, who drives it forward, and initially probably on a small scale. I'm probably going to nominate a couple of people for this to start with. Matthew Thomas from Public Health Wales, who's doing a talk this afternoon, is a brilliant example. He knows loads about the subject, absolutely passionate evangelist for the use of EA. And similarly, Jacek from Atina in Poland, brilliant enthusiast for EA. You just can't get enough of those people. But they can't do it by themselves. And we know time and time again that people, once that enthusiasm has kind of got going, changing the rest of the organization to make it use EA is really hard. You're looking at trying to make an organizational change happen. And it's very difficult to do that with one or two enthusiasts because you need to get it into the organization. We'll talk about some of those issues later on. Of course, where we're aiming for is this kind of Winnie the Pooh stage, with a honeypot at the end of EA is just a thing that we use, like email or Google search. It's just what we do. And getting to that stage is not simple. So what the session is going to try and do is try and maybe damp down the bit at the beginning so that you're maybe more realistic about what you're going to try and do, and pull up the bit at the bottom where really it's just depressing, all the barriers you're going to come across. So if you want to nominate somebody to be the Tigger of your organization, we'll send us to ian@eadocs.com and we'll send you some badges and stuff. So we'll start then with the keys to what I think are the keys to success. Some of this actually is based on a presentation again that Peter Lieber did at a user group in London. Looking, Jackie, 3 years ago. Go and look it up on eausergroup.com. It was a really good. He had a diagram, a bit like my adoption thing, but much more exotic and a much better diagram. So this is my takeaway from probably implementing EA, certainly in 2 projects I can think of where it worked really well, and 2 others where it didn't work at all. Not that EA didn't work, but getting the organization to adopt it. And I have to say, if you take away one thing from this talk, it's that top line. If you can find a senior manager, they may be the CTO of your organization, there may be somebody on the board, they may be somebody just higher up from you in the hierarchy who has a budget to spend and can influence other people. If you can find one of those people who believes that what EA can deliver, doesn't believe in EA, believes in what EA can deliver, then you have a much, much, much better chance. If you don't have a person like that, I think you're always going to struggle. Because every time you come across a barrier, you need a server, you need somebody's time, you need some money, it's going to be hard. So that was my absolute #1 takeaway from, 15 years of trying to get EA into organizations. It's that senior manager person. Going below that, I would say putting the ideas of quality ownership and reusefulness, if they're not on somebody's job objectives, then it won't happen. And if it's not a measurable thing, it won't happen. So it's part of embedding the idea of using EA into your organization rather than being some kind of little tool that a few crazy Tigger kind of characters use. You'll still need, though, your group of enthusiasts, and you'll know when those enthusiasts have been successful, which is when EA models are part of the process. So where this has worked really well, in my experience, was where getting through a particular milestone in the project process said you must have the process changes that you want to make must be in an EA model and have been signed off by the process team. Otherwise, you can't go through the gate. So it was part of the project delivery process. And if you can do that, then even if that senior manager goes away and is replaced by somebody else, you'll go, oh, well, actually, look, the process here says we have to do this in Enterprise Architect. And if you've done that, then you've started to glue this idea into the DNA of the organization. And finally, not finally for the presentation, obviously, you've got to prove it. Just because you and I think that EA is fantastic and everybody should put their structured business knowledge into it, you've got to prove it, and you've got to keep proving it. So because you proved it last year, that was then. This is now. You've got to keep proving it and delivering something useful. So I'll get down a bit lower detail now into some more of the kind of my kind of learning points. One of them is the complexity that EA allows us to use. So it implements, I'll pick an example here of BPMN, the business process modeling notation. BPMN is fantastic. You can model anything in BPMN. It's huge. don't feel you have to use it all. Just because EA says, hey guys, you can use everything, you don't have to. There's some really neat ways of using, I think it's the perspectives mechanism, and hopefully somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, where if you're using just a single program, just a single modeling language, you can use the perspective to say, I only want these kinds of diagrams, I only want these kinds of elements. And it's really quite simple to do. So pick a subset, stick to it. Okay, let people experiment, but don't go crazy. The big enemy here, by the way, is MML. In a normal audience, I'd say put up your hand if you know what MML is. Obviously, it's my modeling language, my special way of doing things. That is absolutely the enemy. Pick a subset, stick to it. Have a hall of fame of, hey, look, Fred here has done a fantastic diagram here, or somebody who we won't name has done a terrible job. Look at this is awful. Don't be afraid to do that. Because what you're aiming for here, and I think this is true of reuse of software, which is what I used to be involved in many, many decades ago, is trust. If a project manager is going to be persuaded to use Enterprise Architect on their project, they're going to have to trust the tool, the knowledge in the tool, the reliability of it. And if you can't deliver all that, they're probably going to go, do you know what? Let's just use Visio. It's simpler. I trust it. I know what it can do. This EA thing's all very clever, but it's too hard. I don't trust it. So that's the trust is what you're aiming for with all the decisions that you make. And within the trust thing, I think is a lot to do with the standards that things are built to. And I would split that quality standards trust thing into two elements. The first is the structural stuff. What types and stereotypes and connectors and diagrams and things do you use? That's relatively easy to write down. You can write it in validation rules, you can put it into scripts, you can put it into Model Expert, you can do all kinds of great stuff. I think everybody should expect that to be there. If you can't say this particular piece of modeling that I'm asking you to reuse is of this quality, and look, I can measure it for you. If you can't do that, I think you might as well give up trying to reuse knowledge across your organization. Then there are the stylistic standards, and that's much harder. So you might say, we've written some user stories in EA, and they pass all the structural tests, they're connected to the right stakeholders and one thing and another. Are they good quality user stories? That's down to human beings to go and read the user stories and say, yeah, that passes the test. It's been peer reviewed, just like I'd peer review my code. Are the requirements written in a good style? Are the diagrams understandable? Well, you can't measure any of that with a computer. It has to be reviewed, and somebody says, yeah, I've looked at this, and that's a really good way of explaining that idea. So these are not mechanical validation ideas, they're people ones. So if you're going to get the trust of people, it's fair to say, look, here's the quality checking that we do on the stuff that we produce. No, we're standing behind this, as is the rest of the organization. Another aspect of this is making things reuseful. Now, for those who don't have English as their first language, don't worry, this isn't actually a proper English word. Many years ago, I used to work on object-oriented software when it was brand new and was going to fix all of life's problems. And when the team I was with developed this idea of reuseful software, and here we're talking about reuseful models. You can't make something reusable. What you can do is make something able to be reused easily. And this diagram is one of my personal favorites of a what I call a look at me diagram. Actually, it's from the EA example, but EA I think picked it up from some of the BPMN OMG, the OMG that produced BPMN. They're kind of examples of, hey, look what you can do. And it's a terrible diagram. It's got far too many boxes and far too many lines. I once spent a very boring train journey for about 3 hours breaking this down into about 7 different diagrams. Nobody's going to be able to reuse this. You can barely even print it. I can't even read the writing on my own slide. So fair enough, maybe you want to put one of those in your model every now and then, but it's really not clever. They're what I call look at me diagrams. Like, I'm going to print this out and put it behind my desk, and then when my boss walks past, they'll go, that Ian, he's a really clever guy because he can draw crazy diagrams like that. I must admit, I have the opposite view, which is, look how stupid that person is. They're just showing off with clever diagrams. Much better to have 5 little ones that relate to each other and go, oh, that person really understands that process. So that's part of the quality and the trust that you should look to try and generate when you're making people trust and reuse your models. Is don't do stuff like this. Give it a style that people can reuse. Now we get on to what's your kind of overall plan of how you think you might roll out EA to a large number of people. And we see sort of 3 versions of this plan. I thought I'd give them these provocative names, but decided I'll just call them the big one and the organic one and the reasonable one. I've seen quite a few big plans that says, right, everybody in the organization shall use Enterprise Architect. We have a big plan, we have a meta model, we have MDGs, processes, training, and we're going to roll it out to everybody and his dog. And I'm trying to think if I've ever seen one of those work. I don't think I have. I've seen a lot of them try. There are just too many moving parts. It's just too difficult. Nobody's that good to say, I know all the problems that you're going to find and I'm going to solve them all with my big plan. It's just not correct, not good. There's another variation, which is oh yeah, but we're agile. We're going to just do some stuff and then do some more stuff and then change stuff. And just by using the word agile, all problems will be solved. And that doesn't seem to work very well either, because pretty quickly you find that this team over here is doing something in one way and this team's doing it in a different way, and their stuff doesn't fit together. You can't form this idea of a single version of the truth, which is what I think most of us in the EA world work towards. It's very difficult to do that from a bunch of teams doing stuff in different ways, even though EA will let you do that. You can have a different style of use case over here from over there. Your user stories here and there can be quite different. It doesn't make it very easy. Somewhere in between those is a reasonable kind of approach. So sure, don't come down on teams from a great height and say, you must do it exactly like this. Give them some guidance, but keep an eye on them and say, you're going way a bit off track. Can I just come alongside and help you and put you back on track again? Get them to deliver stuff and then evolve your approach from team to team. So not let's organize a mass invasion kind of thing, or the little messing around in the dust. Let's just try and get something in between, which is evolving our approach over time. A section now, I guess, on the kind of the mechanics of scaling the thing up. So we've talked about getting trust and getting quality and things like that into your installation. Let's now think about the mechanics. Now, I have to say this section of the presentation has changed almost completely in the last 2 days, mostly since I saw Ryan and Nizam talking about Sparks in the cloud yesterday. It used to be I had to explain what EAPs and EAPXs and shared and master replica. Really, there's 2 choices as I see it. Well, maybe 3. There's it's me and my EAPX file or my EAP file for older installations, which is fine. I can even share that with a couple of my friends if we have it on a shared drive somewhere. And if you've got 3 or 4 people, maybe it might just about work. It's not supported, I don't think, still by Sparks, but kind of works because it's an ancient access database under the covers. More likely, you're going to be in a shared database kind of installation where really it scales in terms of the physical scalability, until hundreds or even thousands of people. I won't talk about federated servers because that's just makes my head hurt. The idea of multiple databases all sharing knowledge and exporting XMIs backwards and forwards, life's too short. I'll touch though on the full cloud deployment, which now that Nizam and his boy geniuses have made this work, let's just do that then. Because your world going from 5 or 10 people enthusiasts about EA, maybe sharing our own little local SQL database, going from that to tens or hundreds of users who may be working far away from us, far away in distance, different part of the organization, so I can't affect how they do things. The world has changed completely. And as a friend of mine or client of mine from a year or 2 back, who was the chief architect of a very large project, said, why are we using EA to do this? It's a thick client solution in a browser world. And It's just hard. I was talking to a client in Central Europe a few weeks ago who said, which version of your software should we install? I said, well, you install the latest version. Oh, no, but we have to make a decision now for the next, I think it was a year or a year and a half. Oh, and that's the version we're fixed on. I said, well, what happens if there are bug fixes? Oh, we can't take bug fixes. Well, whoa, this is crazy. You can't work like that. If you had it on your own little machine with admin rights, you'd install the bug fix. If you're going to roll it out onto hundreds of desktops, you probably can't do that. So what are you going to do? Right, before we do that, and this is obviously heresy, so anybody from Spark Systems, please cover your ears for 2 minutes. Does everybody actually need access to Enterprise Architect? And I'm looking now at what I call a knowledge community. So before you think we have to train everybody who might ever put information into EA or take information out, everybody has to have Enterprise Architect. Well, okay, Sparks would like us all to do that, but in the real world, we don't need to, because there are lots of other ways of doing it. The best way, of course, is collaborate. I can put a web front end onto all of my groovy, clever EA information. I can curate it. I can give people better views. It's going to be easier, faster, cheaper, just generally better for quite a big audience to look into EA. Now, they can make contributions, they can add comments, they can change values of things, so they can do an awful lot of stuff through Collaborate into EA. So I don't have to have it on every single desktop. That's the first thing. And of course, they integrate with all these other groovy desktop tools. I have to have a shout out here because something has to pay the mortgage. EA, they'll have to produce documents, and documents are now a round trip option. My talk tomorrow will be about how you can use documents to allow people to make comments in either Teams or directly into Word in the tracking changes, and pull those comments directly back into EA. So if you've got a bunch of people in your kind of knowledge community who just won't do Collaborate, don't quite know why they'd say that, but they expect a document, then you can give them a document and you can put it into Teams or SharePoint and have them review it and send you back all the comments. So there's lots of variations here. It isn't just about more and more and more EA on people's desktops. It could be cleverer. I have to put this in now that I've seen, say, Ryan and Nizam's talk from yesterday, the cloud solution. This idea of the desktop is just dead. Every organization I go into goes, oh no, it's a thick client install. Oh dear, that's going to be problems and problems. So yeah, you could be best friends with your IT person, or you could just say, look, we've got a better answer here. Let's just put the whole of the EA thing in the cloud. I don't pretend to understand how Nizam and Ryan managed to do that in their session yesterday, but it seems they can make it work, so I'll take their word for it. It's all about VMs and scalability and different images for different people, and it all looks like dark magic to me, but what the hell? It takes away a huge amount of stress from you as the enthusiast trying to get EA into the organization, and says, oh, into the cloud, job done. So let's please try and go to that kind of world, because it's going to put our job back to what it was when we were all Tiggers and enthusiastic, into let's help people to do modeling better. Let's put more information into it and get better value out of it, and not spend our lives writing add-ins and twiddles and clever bits. Let's let somebody else do that. There's a couple of links on the slide there to organizations that will help you to do that. I didn't put the Sparks North America one because I only saw that this morning, but Collaborate, Nizam's team in India will help you do that. And shout out to a bunch of guys in the UK called Mosaic Island, who I know have an up and running virtual EA organization working for one of their clients, and it seems to work really well. They have helpers in there to look at the model quality and make sure the models are looking the way people want it to look, and that seems to be working really well. It's very low friction, and the customer can get involved in doing better modeling, doing better design. So if you need to, contact me later on in the Teams thing, and we can talk about where you can find people who can do that. And I hope more and more organizations will follow that route. I told you this was going to be a bit of a random selection of ideas and things, but that's the nature of the beast. I think there is no one magic secret. I don't think. I don't know. Hands up, anybody who's ever. Oh, that's not going to work, is it? People who've taught other people to use Enterprise Architect for the first time? You know, mentally put your hand up. I've done it a number of times, and it's kind of fun because you say, right, install EA on your desktop and open it up, and they go, wow, all that stuff. I don't need all that. And the answer is, you're right, you don't need all that stuff. But over the years, Sparks has gradually accumulated a whole load of stuff where you can take away menu options, you can reduce the number of things they can see, you can give them MDGs and perspectives and all kinds of techniques to make the EA experience a lot more in the track that they need to follow. They don't need to debug state diagrams on embedded software, mostly. They want to do a thing, so give them that thing. Don't let them see the rest of EA. It would be great. I put a question on the EA forum a few weeks ago about this and got very few replies as to why isn't there a kind of a checklist to go down and say, right, shut that off, remove this, think about that. Does the user need this? There should really be a list of things that we can do. Maybe we can start doing that in the Teams thing later on to give us a simple set of things that EA already has that can make it simple for those first-time users, because we want them to do what we want them to do. Anything else is just noise. It's just visual noise that they just don't need to see, and it's giving them an opportunity to do some mad stuff. But those of you who listened to my talk yesterday would have seen Model Expert doing this thing called guided modeling. Well, that's a pretty extreme way of doing it, I guess, but it's one way to say, look, here's a diagram. These are the things you can put on the diagram. Here's how you check it, save it, on to the next one. So let's try and make that experience for those early days users really good. And then, okay, they can then start to expand what they do and get more ambitious and more adventurous. That'd be great. But let's keep that initial experience simple. So come on, people, let's get back to that forum item and give me that list of different ways we know of simplifying EA. Looking back at some of these previous projects, I was trying to find common points where the ones that went right, this is what they did, and the ones that went wrong, this is what they did or didn't do. One of them I've talked about at the very top was they have an executive sponsor. That's still my number one item. But the harvesting of knowledge into EA and the integrating, therefore, of EA with other tools, I think is something that seems to be important as teams grow. Again, this has changed totally in the last 2 days from listening to other people's. Some of you may have seen this just this morning from Peter Lieber. Excellent presentation of all the different ways you can get information in and out of EA. I had a slide that tried to say this. Peter's is much better. I'm afraid I've missed out the bottom bit, but look at Peter's presentation from this morning. It was really, really good. So there's just loads and loads of technical ways that I can pull information into EA and send EA information out into the world. So let's remember that these are all possible. Let's not necessarily do them all, but let's remember that they're possible. But where do you start in harvesting and integrating? And to me, it's about, is that knowledge going to be useful for anything? Because yeah, technically I can write an interface from EA into DAWs. Yeah, so what? What's the use case for that then? Unless I've got those use cases really nailed, that says, right, well, my new approach to writing user stories will be I'll pull the requirements out of DAWs, and the user story will realize these different requirements. Fantastic. And from what Peter said today, you can just do that, and that will be fantastic. And the DAWs information will be kept up to date as well as your own. So fantastic. But I've seen lots of other things pulled into EA. Some really simple stuff that's made a big difference. Things like organization charts. Oh, don't do that, Ian. Simple stuff like organization charts makes it much easier to assign ideas and tasks and stuff to different people. Why is that data not in EA? So the organization chart for your team and the bits of the organization you're going to deal with. Other things I've put in are surprising stuff like introduction to my project. So in pretty well every EA project I've done for the last 10 years, there's been a little section which says project introductions. Here's the thing, there's project intro in a paragraph, in a page, in 2 or 3 pages with some diagrams, and I use those loads and loads of times in different documents. So it should be a standard part. So if you've got it in a document somewhere, just copy and paste it, pull it in, and use that for lots of different stuff. It's not exciting content, but it's going to save you a load of work. Test results, by the way, being pulled in from different projects is something that I've used before as well, because that's proper data that I can say that's been produced by a process, pull that in and say, right, based on these test results, this is what this piece of software really does. Let's move it on and make another release for it. Don't, though, be tempted to, because you're a Tigger and you're an enthusiast and you want to make stuff happen, to say, "Oh, because I can weld a wheelbarrow to a bicycle, I'm going to get a better wheelbarrow and a better bicycle." I won't. I'll just get a totally useless wheelbarrow and a totally useless bicycle. So just because you can technically integrate EA with something is no reason to do it. EA is just giving us a lot of these options. It's up to us to be careful and say, that use case there, if I could integrate with that piece of software, then I'm going to make a difference. And things like Collaborate have got a lot of those already done. So if you want to integrate with Confluence and Jira and things like that, it's all done. You don't need to think about the technicals. You just need to think, what's the use case to actually use that? One warning really. A lot of integrations talk about pulling information into EA and referencing it and then successively updating it. Fantastic. Much harder is to do it 2 directions. So you're doing an update in EA and that's pushed out to something else. Needs to be a little more care about doing that. Mostly about the life cycle of that knowledge. Who owns it? Who's responsible for making the EA model up to date? Who's responsible for refreshing it? Who's responsible for the quality of it? So there's a lot of things to think about as you're pulling this information backwards and forwards. So don't think that because you've been to Nizam or Peter's team and you've got a technical integration, yeah, it's job done. No, it's job just starting. You need to know who owns the data, who's responsible for its quality. And if you've done that, now you can rely on that data. And people seem to react. The psychology is interesting. People seem to react really well if they go into EA and they see a whole load of stuff that they recognize. They see organization charts with people that they know. They see projects that they know. They see test results that they were involved in. And that gives them confidence that this enterprise architect thing is actually really useful. So just a bit of simple psychology. Can't really talk about EA and teams without thinking about governance. And if you're anything like me, somebody starts talking about governance and my eyes start to get heavy and I start getting more comfy in my chair. I think, oh, the governance bit, I can go to sleep now. And yeah, it's dull. It's absolutely dull until you do what I did, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago and spent a whole week doing some modeling, came to reintegrate it back into the model, and it turned out I'd started from the wrong place. And I've just wasted a whole week. And then I thought, this governance thing, maybe it's something I need to care about. So I became involved in it. Looking back over different projects, the problem with governance is one size absolutely does not fit all. If somebody says, haha, here is my EA governance approach, laugh and tell them to go away, because there is no approach that I've ever seen that fits every project. There seemed to be, though, a kind of a spectrum of governance approaches, because what we're trying to avoid here is people doing the same thing twice, people being able to rely on information they're using from somewhere else, people understanding what they're seeing and the quality of what I'm seeing being good. So that's what, to me, governance is all about. And there seems to be this kind of spectrum from the kinds of models where the knowledge sharing is low. You think, well, why the hell am I using EA if my knowledge sharing is low? I'm talking about knowledge sharing between projects. So if I've got a project that's doing a brand new thing, it's collecting a load of requirements, it's writing some use cases or user stories, it's doing some bits of design, brand new hardware, brand new software, brand new everything, they're not going to share much knowledge with anybody else. At the other end of the scale, if I'm in, let's say, like a telco or something like that, where I've got mountains of existing software and nearly every new solution I'm involved in involves some small changes to some existing software, reusing lots of it, maybe a new component somewhere. So relatively small changes. So the knowledge sharing I'm doing with the organization is really large. The two approaches to governance will be quite different. If I'm on the smaller side, I just want to say, here's a good way of writing your requirements. Probably nobody else is ever going to reuse them, but you might as well write them right, just in case anybody does need to reuse it. If you're on the other side, you probably want a high level of governance. And I'm going to share with you something that I learned about. I think we had a model management seminar in our offices in Wales last year sometime. Yeah, last year sometime. And somebody presented this, and I thought it was brilliant. So in their idea of governance is they have an architecture which says which components exist and how they're linked, and projects use instances of those components, and they draw sequence diagrams based on the instances. And if they discover a new operation, then there's a very tightly controlled process that says, please, architecture world, I need this new interface, or I want to change this interface on an existing piece of software, because that's a big deal, particularly if you're a telco. It's a huge deal. And that to me said, if I'm in this very, very tightly controlled environment, this is a brilliant way of doing it, because I can do whatever I like with this component instance down here. I can connect it to stuff, I can make its color change, I can add things to it. It's no problem. It doesn't change. It's in EA terms, it's classifier up here. And that, I thought, that's a pretty clever way of doing it. Talk to me later if you want to know more about how to do that. I'll point you to the man who knows. But I would like that as using instances to make that work really well. At the other end of the scale, if I've got my projects which are actually, I think they're completely disjoint, they're probably not. They probably are, over time, going to get closer and closer together. Even if they're using boring stuff like organization roles and stakeholders and things like that, they will get closer and closer together. So you are going to have to start to do something that creates a process of, I've created a thing, maybe it's a copy of something, or I won't go into EA time-aware modeling because I'm not sure that's quite robust enough for this kind of thing. But something that says I've made a change to a shared element and I now need to promote it back to become usable by everybody else. And we can talk about another day maybe about the process that I need to do that. If you haven't got a process that does that, then you're sliding down a slippery slope, and eventually you'll go faster and faster and it'll all go bang. So worth having a lightweight process to manage these kinds of things at the start, because eventually you'll need to make it bigger and bigger, because there'll be more and more information in your EA model that people want to use. So that's all good. We talked in my session yesterday about Model Expert, about fixing models after they've gone wrong, or fixing models before they go wrong. You won't be amazed to say that obviously I have a preference that I'd rather fix models as I'm going along, as people are creating it, rather than spending my life fixing models that have already gone bad. So fixing them after the event is bad because it's dull. It also means the team never improve. So using techniques like MDGs and Model Expert and other stuff makes this easier, because I can start to train my modelers to do things the right way at the beginning. Okay, it's effort on my part, but the bigger the scale you're going to, the better return you're going to get on that time. If you're only training a handful of people, maybe it's not worth using MDGs and profiles and Model Expert. Maybe it's just better to get on a Zoom call with them and have a chat and review their material occasionally. So you've got to scale this to how big and ambitious you are. So I would certainly say fixing things after it's been modeled before you then promote it to be for general use. It's not the end of the world, but you don't want to spend the rest of your life doing that. Fixing it in flight is harder to do, but the reward will be there in the end. And it will also, it's a bit like when you teach something to somebody, it makes you think about your own knowledge. So if you're going to try and write a bunch of rules, whether they're MDGs, profiles, model expert, whatever. The mere act of you thinking about those rules will make you smarter and will make the rules better. So it's something to bear in mind. So we're getting, I think, towards the end of what I wanted to talk about today. The one-day course that I do on this is quite a different. It started out about the same, and over the last 2 days, this has got in a totally different direction. So I've just picked out 4 things that I would probably touch on in a one-day workshop and kind of amplified those a bit. So this is my kind of takeaway. If you only take away one thing, this should be it. So the senior sponsor is at the top. And everybody thinks that they're such a great Tigger, they're such a great enthusiast, and they have so much knowledge that they don't need a senior sponsor. And they're all wrong. And all the times I've tried to do that without a sponsor, I've failed. So I'll put my hand up here. We learn more by failing often than succeeding. Where I've got the sponsor, and the sponsor often by the nature of the person says, well, if this is going to be a useful thing, it's got to be part of a process. The two often go together. Okay. The scaling part just got a load more simple, a lot more simple. Ideas of replicating repositories and change control and versioning and all kinds of stuff just went away. So we now have EA on the web. I can bring up EA in my browser, job done. I don't really want to worry about that problem anymore. And if some people want to have it installed on their desktop, then fine. But for the vast majority, I'm sure if we look back in 2 or 3 years' time, I'm sure most people are going to have it on a browser, and we'll all look back and go, why did we ever run EA as a thick client? That was bonkers. So that's my takeaway from that. Harvesting, yes, we can now do lots of clever integrations and pull information into EA, but let's really be critical about which bits we pull in, because there's some easy bits that I can pull in and reuse a lot that aren't massively important, but they're kind of useful. There's some harder parts which I'm really going to have to work hard at and maybe do a 2-way integration, and they're really, really useful, but quite hard to maintain. So maybe like a live doors integration, but wow, I can get some real value. My doors users can keep using doors, and eventually we'll get them to use Enterprise Architect, of course, but that's a task for another day. And finally, the governance bit that says, I'm not going to take my team of 5 or 10 Tiggers and enthusiasts and just make it bigger. The world will be different. They're going to have a different process that they follow to promote things into shared areas. They're going to have ways of looking at quality, whether that's MDGs or model expert or whatever. So don't let anybody say, I have the governance approach. They don't. They need to listen to what kind of modeling you're going to do and how you're going to do it and who's involved and where they are and what their skill level is. Then you can design a governance process for them. So finally, I've put my hand up to saying, somebody has to pay for all this. I do a lot of this kind of stuff remotely. I used to do it before the lockdown, and even more so now. A remote mentoring thing where we help you to grow your team and talk about these kind of issues, which we've been doing it over the net for the last 6 years or so with lots of different clients. And finally, if you think you're an EA Tigger, then we'll give you one of these unique little badges. I hope you can see that. I'm a model expert. Reply to either not into the teams necessarily, but into Ian at eaDocX.com or Ian at abilityengineering.co.uk, and we'll send you a badge. And then all of your friends will say you are an EA expert. So I finished with 2 minutes to spare, which is not like me at all. I must have been speaking maybe at the right speed today. So I will be available now in the chat area. So it's back to Nizam.
Thank you very much, Ian. As always, this session has already triggered a lot of interesting conversations in the teams. And it's ironic that you started saying you're no expert, but you have just consolidated years of expertise and given to us in like 40 minutes. I think this is really, really valuable insights for anyone who is contemplating to start with the EA practice. So thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation. We got a lot of conversations going on. I'll let you continue your discussions with the rest in the Teams channel. if that is okay. So, maybe I can ask a quick question from Jerry, which says, for a large organization, do you think they need a EA administrator or librarian to train users, promote team models to shared models, etc.? Also, would a separate role be required for EA integration to other tools in these organizations?
The answer is yes and yes, but the caveat would be, why do those people have to work for your organization? Because those skills are quite high demand. You're not probably going to use them all the time. Getting somebody skilled up to do that is going to be quite difficult, and then they're probably going to go and leave and work for somebody else. So I would tend to buy that person from the outside and make that part of your outsourced cloud service that you buy from somebody else. And I've seen that working several places. And what it means is the person you get to do that job is way better than the one you would be able to train yourself, because that person you're going to get has done this 10 times before. So the answer is yes, the role is required, but it's only a role, and it could be done by somebody else.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And forum like this could be a really good opportunity to find experts in different fields. Like, there are people in this forum with several years of experience doing certain things. And I guess you're right. Like, these are niche things that could be outsourced. Thank you for that. Okay. So we thank you all once again for joining the session, and thanks, Ian, for the wonderful presentation. So we request you to join the Teams channel once again, and we look forward to see you in the next presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll be keeping this webinar on for a while. If anyone has any problem joining the Teams channel, please feel free to drop a question or reach out to me in chat. I'll have this webinar on for another 10 minutes.